what achievements were made during the first phase of Bomas?
The first phase of the Bomas was a plenary session that brought together all the 629 delegates. It provided an opportunity for the members to understand all the chapters, to go through all the chapters and understand what the issues are. And I think it also was an opportunity for the delegates to build consensus on some issues and to understand those contentious issues on which there were divergent views. So in a way, Bomas I did chart a course really for the whole conference, and at the end of it all, we knew which are the areas on which we need to build consensus now at the technical committee level. So I think it was a very successful, in my view, stage of the conference, and the 2 months did provide an insight really into what the issues were and what Kenyans want exactly. All that came out. For instance, the contentious issue of the Prime Minister, it did come out quite clearly that Kenyans want a Prime Minister. That I think was one of the bottom line things that came out. So in terms of conceptualizing what Kenyans want, what are the issues that require consensus building really or Kenyans have a lot of divergence on, all those things did come out. So I think it makes it easier now in the second phase to go down to the real issues.
So like when you begin on Monday, how do you see the task ahead?
I think when we begin on Monday, the technical committees will be convened and will run concurrently. Each committee will have its own chapters to handle. And I think it is at this stage that the delegates are required to go into detail, clause by clause, to examine what are the issues. And I think it is a trade-off. It's a time when members will be required to trade off on some issues that, okay, let us allow this clause, let us allow this provision to go forward, no, let us delete it. And the voting, I think, of the committee for the first time on this subject will be taking place in this committee stage. So what I see is that, however, some contentious issues that came up during the first Bomas I are likely to resurface now and more critically in this phase. And they're likely to create quite a bit of discussions in those committees. This includes, for instance, the Prime Minister's issue. It includes the Kurdish courts. And obviously the devolution is also an area that's likely to generate a lot of discussion, particularly in the context of the costs involved in devolution. I'm convening the Finance Committee and Public Service. And I think one of the things we wanted to do was to try and find out how much it would cost to implement devolution at district or provincial or those levels. Another area that might be important, which will come up, is the provincial administration. When we're looking at public service, in recent weeks, some key members of the NAC government have been insisting that provincial administration may, in fact, be retained. And I think Kenyans in the draft are very clear that they don't want to see provincial administration in its current form. So I think the next phase is going to provide an opportunity. It's going to be exciting, and I'm sure it's going to raise a lot of suspicions and so forth, and particularly within the context of the current wrangles within NAC. So it's going to be a phase that is going to be very difficult, I think, in the history of this country, and I think it's going to be the phase which either this thing will go forward or will collapse. I think this will be the stage at which we will have to make those decisions as a nation.
Now, Parliament adjourned for only 2 months. I'm meant to understand that when before the conference adjourned, there was some sort of a tentative program that was done for 7 weeks, that you come back for 7 weeks, assuming that within those 7 weeks we will have finished everything. Do you think that time frame is feasible?
I think the time frame will be feasible if there's going to be consensus on the contentious issues. It's not going to be feasible if there's going to be a lot of heated arguments, and in the manner that we have now seen regarding the Prime Minister, then there's likely to be difficulties in meeting that time frame. But however, my own feeling is that this thing is larger than NAC. The NAC members are not more than 100 or so, 120 or something. But I think we have got the district delegates who know clearly what they want and who represent the views of the Kenyans. We have the civil society, we have the members of other political parties. And I think that is the group that is going to determine the course of the events in this Bomas II. And if that happens, then in my view, the 5 or 6 weeks that we have should be adequate to finalize. If not all the chapters, I think majority of the chapters or the technical committees should be able to finalize it. And perhaps the chapters that would require more time because of the contentious nature of the issues contained therein will be the judiciary, for instance, and the executive. Those two might take a bit longer, but even then, I'm quite sure that the issues have now been well understood, and I think the delegates will arrive there majority of the time with a mindset on what they want exactly. But of course, 5-6 weeks, depending on how the program is going to be conducted, depending on whether there will be attempts to delay it, because that again has happened in Bomas I. We have seen attempts to try and drag the whole thing. We have seen attempts to derail the whole thing by bringing in frivolous issues. So I think all those things will determine, but I'm sure it is also at this committee stage that amendments can be brought in, proposals for amendments of certain clauses and sections within the draft can be brought in. So if members are not going to and I'm sure they will be, we have seen in the last few weeks following the wrangles in NAC, we are concerned, particularly in KANU, that top leaders within NAC government may be tempted to try and derail this process by bringing in unnecessary amendments, by dragging out the meetings with contentious issues and so forth. But I think the Kenyans are very, a majority of the delegates are going to be firm. We have seen that in the last, and especially when the conference was being closed. They were very clear in their minds that any attempt by the government or any of the top people in the government to delay or to drag this exercise in a manner that will seem to be an attempt to derail it will be resisted vigorously. And I think this is the challenge. And I think in KANU we are determined to take the stage this time. Given the kind of circumstances in which NAC has found itself in, we want to take the initiative to try and lead the process. And I think with the district delegates and the other participants, we should be able to overshadow the differences within NAC which might impede the speedy progress of the conference.
Okay, we've seen NAC as a party of late, belatedly trying to come up with a sort of a uniform kind of opinion ahead of Bomas. They'll try to do it before their parliamentary group on Monday. What have you as KANU members done? Do you have any common stand ahead of Bomas II?
KANU, I think, in Bomas I, developed a number of positions on some of the critical areas. On the issue of affirmative action for women, we did develop a position, a common position in KANU, which we articulated at the plenary and I think in the press conferences. On the issue of the card escort, we also did take a unified position on the matter. I think the issue on which we may not have come out clearly is on the issue of the Prime Minister. We did, however, indicate that there must be a Prime Minister. That we have decided upon. What type of a Prime Minister was the issue that has not been decided upon. But now I'm convinced that over the period that this thing has been processed, we've been talking to each other on this matter, and KANU is likely to push for an executive Prime Minister on this matter. So KANU is likely to have a unified position on most of the issues. But I think the attempt by NAC to try and develop a common point agenda on this is not likely to succeed, because the mistrust, the differences really run deep in this, and it has to do with the memorandum of understanding, the manner in which the government, the president, is conducting his affairs, for instance, in appointment of public servants and so forth. So there are a lot of issues which determine this, and I think we have seen already some members of NACA, and particularly those in LDP, have made it quite clear that they are not likely to go ahead with the cabinet's decision. And we support that. We support any attempt. We actually reject also any attempt by the government to try and deny the members in the party an opportunity to air to criticize their leaders. I mean, that's why they're in parliament, to discuss issues openly, and criticize government where it is wrong, and I think that's their role as members of parliament. So I think the attempt by cabinet to put things under the carpet, I think is not going to work, because this agreement on the Prime Minister, for instance, is not going to work. It's a joke. It's a joke, because that's a decision to be made by the conference, and no one else can make it. And there's no way government of NAC can come to that conference and say, we want to present the position of the government or NAC government. You remember the last time, attempts by the Minister for Lands to try and bring a position of the Lands Ministry, or there was also another one trying to bring a position of OP and whatever, was rejected by delegates. We are there as Kenyans, as individuals, and we are there to contribute our opinions, not as government. It doesn't make sense, therefore, to imagine that the NAC cabinet can mainstream their views in that conference of the government. So we think it's not going to work.
Okay. Now the issue of the Kadhi's courts. Now there's some doubts about the ability of the technical committees actually developing some sort of a consensus on most of those contentious issues. What happens if they fail to agree to come up with a common position?
That is why all this time is required, because this process requires consensus building. There's need to build confidence with each other. There's need to have trust within each other. That at the end of the day, what we are doing is for posterity, is for this nation. So members will obviously, at the same time, we know that in constitution making, there are interest groups. Everybody there represents a particular interest and will try and advance the interest of his or her organization. However, it will lead to a process of negotiations. When members can trade off, they can compromise on a number of issues. It will take, that's why the time is there. Otherwise, some of the chapters are actually pretty small, but it's because of that need to try and negotiate, to compromise, that we need additional time. But so the process requires that there has to be a consensus, really. We will try to avoid a situation where members are required, delegates will be required to vote on an issue. But if it comes to them, that will be the only way out. And I think any disagreement ultimately will then be carried forward to the next plenary session, because there will be a final plenary session where all the recommendations and the final proposed amendments and all that will be submitted to the delegates for discussion. I think that's going to be the final thing, but I think we will try and attempt to resolve the issues at technical committee level, so that when we go to plenary, we do not carry forward again contentious issues for discussion.